Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, we're back with Deirdre and Andy because we actually didn't get to all the questions in our final hop in practice. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a little quick 5-minute Q&A with Deirdre now on the questions that we didn't get to. So we have the first one. Hi panelists, any thoughts on what type of unplanned events would you consider to apply a learning team's approach?
Yeah, so I think where learning teams can be of value is if you think that there's going to be some deep learning that you can get out of any thing, whether it's planned or unplanned. So I think it's a judgment call. So, you know, a good example is one that we did recently in the business around multiple incidents that had occurred that we actually did investigations on, but we knew that there was more in it. So we did a learning team on something that we'd already thought we'd done some learning on, and they were all unplanned events because they were incidents, but we took it all together in its, you know, 6 or 7 incidents around scaffolding, and then we got our scaffolding contractors together as part of our learning team and actually asked them what makes a job go really, really well, and what does it look like when you're successful, and what's our part as an organisation in that. And we actually got a lot more rich information about things that didn't come out in our investigation processes. So what I would say is that there's so many opportunities. It's about as long as a piece of string in terms of what you make a decision about doing a learning team on. It's more about really thinking about, have you learnt enough? And then making a decision where the value is for your organisation. So it could be anything. So I don't think limit yourself, but also I think it's probably a good idea to be a bit prudent around the decision you make, because you can't do a learning team on everything. It's very time consuming, and you don't want to annoy your business either. So yeah, so I think judgment's okay, and if you make a mistake about it, you always can have another go doing something else.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the interesting things, isn't it, with learning teams, is it's like, you know, in traditional safety management systems and so forth, you have classifications of types of events, and then the classification drives what happens beyond that, whether it's a local response only or a formal investigation. And then in aviation, now into this like level 1 or level 2 or level 3 investigation, and on it goes. Whereas obviously we're taking a far more kind of context dependent and more of a judgment call really around, okay, what sort of operational potential or operational learning potential is there, as opposed to, is this recordable, is this at a certain severity now, and that drives the decision for you. So I think that's probably hit the nail on the head in terms of, yeah, it's the potential for learning as opposed to the severity or non-severity of the event.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And we kind of can get ourselves wrapped up with our own process. So one of the things I'm learning is that sometimes the process can actually hamper your learning, because you're so focused on the process, but the process might actually be flawed or not necessarily geared towards learning. It might be geared towards getting a particular outcome, but you miss all this other rich information that sits within the complexity of how an organisation actually works. So I think, you know, if you're going to be starting off on this journey, gut instinct is okay. Like, you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's okay to have a learning team that doesn't work particularly well. Just have another go, right? So, yeah, I don't think there's any formula that anybody can give you. If you think you can learn, have a go. Yeah.
What would your advice be, Deirdre, just on that note of, if you're feeling a bit constrained by your own processes or procedures within and how you need to operate? Do you have advice for what do people do if they are feeling constrained?
Well, it depends on where the constraint's coming from, I think. So if you feel like you can't bust out of the constraint that you've got, I think follow the process, right? So you don't need to, you know, go rogue or, you know, not follow your process. So it's okay to follow your process. So do the investigation. It doesn't mean you can't do something as well. So
Yep.
I think that's the thing. Like, if you're a bit worried about how the organisation is going to respond to the fact that you haven't got an ICAM for,
Yeah.
a level 4 or level 5 incident,
Yeah.
do one. Like, do one if that's what the organisation's pushing for.
Yeah.
But how you can change that dialogue is say, well, we've actually done this as well, and this is really rich information that didn't come out of our ICAM process. So maybe we should have a different approach the next time, or have a dual approach the next time, because we can learn more deeply. So
you can almost like build a case if you're doing it concurrently in a way.
yeah, and then if you find like really you're getting so much more benefit out of doing it differently, well then I guess canvas whoever owns the process and change it. So
True. Also another option. Yeah, true.
A lot of that we've actually created ourselves as a HSE function. We've created that. So the only people who are holding that is us. So if it's not working, we actually can change it. Nobody's stopping us. So
it's like we're the
except
barrier
for
to
maybe
ourselves.
Yeah, except for ourselves. So
Yeah, I say that
it's
to clients
safe.
all the time. You don't need permission. You don't need permission to go and do it. It's
Yeah.
only themselves that need to figure it out.
But I think the thing is that we've got to understand about ourselves is that, we have a defined process that we've been working within for however long, right? A long time for some people. So if you think about psychological safety and people's safety, it sort of sits within, this is the way I've always done it. So that's not just the operators or the people who are doing certain things, it's us too. So it feels safe to do an ICAM because that's the process I've always used. So and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it might not get us to where we want to go. So we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just need to think about how we can do something additional and then go, let's transition. So every organisation's different. Some people go, woohoo, let's move straight away. And other organisations go, no way are we moving away from that. But I'm okay to try something new as long as it doesn't impact.
Yeah, a lot of the time we sort of we talk about, well, how would you start out, and starting out with something, a safe to fail, if you will.
So I love a pilot. Pilots are just my absolute, I love them because you kind of go, well, I'm safer in a pilot because it's small, and also you can test what's going to work and what's not going to work and learn in a pilot kind of phase. So some people love them, some people hate them, but I don't know about you, but I always try a pair of shoes on before I buy them. So
we definitely love that term pilot because it's for an organization, it doesn't feel like, especially if they're new, it doesn't feel like they're making a commitment to it yet. So a few of our clients have started with a pilot. Oh, we're going to do this as a pilot and see what happens. And we kind of know that once they've done the pilot, they're going to be so happy with the results, they're going to want to do it anyway. But it just makes it feel a little bit less of a scary commitment.
But also I think too, one of the things that I've also found is that sometimes people misuse pilots because they go, we'll pilot it because we're really going to do it. So I think you really need to be honest that if it's a pilot, it's actually a pilot, not some kind of way to sneak in your process. So I think you've just got to be a bit authentic about that as well, because otherwise people twig pretty quickly that you're just going to steamroll them, and that's not the intent of this stuff, right? Like, let's be really, if we're going to pilot something, let's be honest and go, it's actually really a pilot. So and be willing to have people hate it. Then you just got to try another way.
Listen to news you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
New news you don't want to hear, I guess. Yeah, cool. We had another question, and it's still sort of around learning teams and where you'd use them. Have you used a learning team to look at normal successful work?
Not yet. We're probably still in the place of well, I mean, I guess you could really look at the bushfires. It was successful. It was still an event. It was successful, but you could use it like that. But I think probably in the true sense of what real successful work looks like when nothing's happened, we probably haven't got to that yet, but I'd like to. So what we're doing is we're looking at some of the data and going, okay, well, where do things really go well and we don't see anything that fails, and then we're going to start thinking about really how do we actually prioritize where we might get the most value out of doing a learning team around that. versus something that's already happened, and we still have real opportunity to learn about incidents that have occurred, and there's rich learning there. So we've probably focused there because there's so much there. But I think we will transition to looking at our data more fulsomely when people get used to the process of a learning team, and then go back to the data and go, well, why haven't we ever had that happen? And let's really look at that in a deeper way. So probably the straight answer is kind of, but not in a purist way.
Yeah.
But we will go there for sure when we get a bit more mature.
Yeah,
and that's really interesting that you started with the events and started with things that have been happening, and then working to normal work. Like we oftentimes when we start in organizations, maybe they're a little bit further behind the 8 ball, so to speak, but we tell them when they first start learning how to do learning teams, start with normal work, because it's easier in terms of there's not that nasty incident or event that's already happened, which comes with a whole lot of baggage, obviously, in terms of so then to be trying something new in that context for some people feels even more scary. So we say, go somewhere where you've got a feeling there may be issues, but there's no event per se, and then go and do a learning team on that process or that task, and that tends to kind of, it's an easier jump off, I guess, than jumping straight into an event or something that's gone on.
I think it's really interesting because I think it really depends on your culture. So some cultures may absolutely find that easier. I think in my organisation, I think because we do a lot of activity around where something actually happens, it's part of how we do work is when something happens. So I think it's probably, look, I don't know, but probably my gut instinct would be that if I said, oh, let's do a learning team around normal work and stuff that hasn't happened, they'd kind of scratch their heads and go, why? Yeah, so I think it for us, and look, I might be wrong, but I think for us, I'll test it and ask some questions. But I think that people feel more comfortable with the fact that we're learning from something that's happened because it's part of our culture to respond when things happen. So it's not countercultural. So it's just kind of bringing something new in that actually fits into what we're already doing. But I will test that because I haven't really thought about it like that before. Because my instinct would be that people would find that more challenging, but don't know. So I'm going to go and be a little bit curious about that one.
Well, as a facilitator, it's certainly different because there's not the same focus point. When you have an event, what it is you're going to learn about.
Yeah.
Whereas you're going to learn about normal work, it's a lot more. It could go anywhere, and I guess that's the beauty of it. You kind of like you go there not knowing what you're going to learn about, even, and then it can go. Who knows where it's going to go, and that's what I find really interesting and curious.
It would be, but I just think I think it would be, and I think absolutely. I just think that potentially that might be a little bit more daunting for people who haven't done it before. So I will test that because I think that's really curious. So
you'll have to let us know how it goes.
Thank you. Yeah,
cool. All right, so we have a couple more questions. Did these teams already have some exposure to learning teams? So referring to the video, do you think sorry, you start with that, and we've got a follow-up question here as well.
Okay, so the people who came to our bushfire learning team, no, they didn't. So it was purely, let's get together and have a conversation. So no, so it didn't have to be. We just set the context really clearly. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, fair. You've probably answered this little follow-up bit, but it said they've said, do you think the virtual would have worked so well if it was new, or would in person be best to start? But I mean, it was new.
I did with them, so it was new. So they were really open to it.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic environment. So I think sometimes we can underestimate. I think probably as a functional team, we were more worried about it than they were. So they were fine. We were going, oh, how's this going to work? So I think sometimes we make assumptions about how people are going to be, and Operators are fine. They've got to do this stuff all the time, right? They're always in a dynamic environment. So it's probably more uncomfortable for us than it was for them.
Yeah, cool. Last question. How did you handle resistance to team members, Deirdre, if there was any? And how was this different from other operational conversation?
So we didn't get any resistance from the people who we invited, because what we did was we framed it about they could come if they wanted. We really valued what they'd gone through, and we really wanted to hear their stories. So there was people who wanted to be involved. So there was no resistance from the people who came. And we didn't want to be, it's you and you, because it just sets the whole tone it sets the tone in a way that you don't want to continue.
Yeah.
I think the resistance, if there was any, probably more of a philosophical resistance from middle management than anything. Around, well, why we do this? Why are we releasing our people? You know, we could just do an ICAP. Why are you talking to me about this? And so I had to spend a fair bit of time talking to the middle management versus the guys who are actually doing the work around the value proposition for why we would release people to engage in the forum. And that was not something I was expecting. So I learned something from that too, and that helped me to frame my elevator pitch, if you like, around why this was important, and really went back to principles around, you know, well, our organisation's one where we really want to learn, we really want to set up an environment that people feel like they can share their stories in a blame-free context. And, you know, so I really had to go back and really think about the sell point to middle management. But they came along once they saw that their people were engaged. And then really, you know, by doing the video, it showcased our people, but it showcased the leaders as well. And so that was kind of cool too. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was nice. It's nice just to have that visibility across. But I think it certainly feeds in, like, where you still have that consistent theming and language around learning. Yeah, it's still like, okay, so we've got top leadership now. We've talked to the pointy end, but we've still got this middleman to kind of frame this to as well.
Yes. And I think that's so important that we really think about our stakeholders and how we engage each level of stakeholder. Because if we really want to enact change, we've got to get as many people on board the bus as we can.
Yeah. Just on those three levels, I'm curious, where did you kind of feel like you needed to start with it? Like, was it, you know, the board and the leadership that you thought, all right, here's going to be my first stakeholders that I'm going to engage, or how did that kind of roll for you?
Well, I probably started it there, to be honest. I probably started at the board, and that was based on conversations and feedback they were giving to us a while ago. And then I really sat down and thought about why they were giving us that feedback and what did that actually mean. So I really sat back and reflected on that. And then they were hungry, but they didn't know what they wanted. So then it was about me figuring out what that might look like, and then thinking about how we would do that in an operational context without putting a burden on the business. So, so it wasn't 1, 2, 3. It was in parallel and all mixed together. And I learned as I went as well. So, you know, I think there's no formula. Some people might be able to have a formula. Some organisations are fine with that, but ours probably a little bit more, we're matrix, and we're probably a little bit more organic in many ways. So I really had to, and I've got a lot of leaders that I engage with. You sort of seen the size of the portfolio. So, and everyone's got a different type of business and a different type of agenda and different risks and different priorities. So it's really important for me to think about each of those stakeholders and think about how I might want to frame my message. And sometimes you use one business and go, well, these guys are going, don't you think it might be a good idea if you get on board? So you kind of go, oh, look at what they're doing and look what they're doing.
Yeah.
So,
Look at what they're finding over here.
I want some of that, right? So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Just builds to the conversation. Cool. Well, that's it for the questions. So we have now answered them all. So thank you for just staying on and just doing this little final Q&A with us. Your time is so appreciated.
Oh, well, it was really fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the invite, and hopefully people got something out of it.
I'm sure they did.
You certainly did. Thanks, Deirdre.
Excellent. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.